Hi. Per a recent study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, around a third of the physicians at academic centers expressed an intent to leave in the next 2 years due to lack of professional fulfillment and well-being. A survey conducted by the American Society of Clinical Oncology reported a significant deterioration in professional satisfaction of the oncologists, with over 59% respondents reporting one or more symptoms of burnout in 2023. Empowering Oncologists is a podcast brought to you by OncoDaily, where we envision to change these stats one step at a time. Welcome. I am Jasmin Kamboj, your host for Empowering Oncologists. Today, we bring to you a unique session based on the recent JCO publication promoting reasonable career expectations and maximizing professional fulfillment for academic oncologists, ASCO's recommendations for academic medical centers. We have two very special guests who don't need any introductions, Dr. Clifford Hudis, the Chief Executive Officer for ASCO, and Dr. Eric Weiner, ASCO President for 2022-23 and Director of Yale Cancer Center. Besides them being known internationally for their stellar contributions as physicians, researchers, leaders, mentors, and wonderful human beings, they're both strong advocates for the various challenges in the field of oncology. Drs. Hudis and Weiner, welcome and thank you for being here on such short notice. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
It's a pleasure.
My first question is, what led you to write this article?
So this article came as a result of many discussions we had at the ASCO board meetings about the fact that there was certainly some degree of burnout among oncologists, that many oncologists seemed to be leaving the field, and that particularly in academic centers, and our interest is not only in academic centers, but we thought we would tackle these issues one at a time, that at academic centers, many oncologists felt that they were being squeezed in many different directions, that they were expected to see more and more patients and at the same time produce research. And we felt that we needed to write something that was addressed to the leaders at these academic centers.
How have you personally navigated your career to achieve your own professional fulfillment, and how do you think it has changed over the years?
I'll let Cliff answer that first.
Well, so Eric, rightly pointed out that a lot is expected of academic physicians. And this is an issue that we talk about all the time. Really, if you think about it, a master clinician is an expectation. A well-funded researcher is an expectation. An accomplished administrator and manager is an expectation, and there's an educational role that's expected as well. All these things, I think, add up to more than one full-time equivalent. And I think for all of us, struggling to balance all of those things is a career-long adventure, and it certainly was for me. I'll just say that fulfillment, for me, or navigating to this point, always was about finding the center. And despite all that, for me, it always was around patient care. It's a privilege to be welcomed into somebody's life, and especially so when they're facing what is usually the greatest challenge that they and their family have ever had to navigate. And there's an intimacy, again, that I think is a privilege that's strengthening for us. I think the challenge, to come back to the paper, though, is to figure out some way of improving the work environment for all of our colleagues so that they are able to focus and be in that moment and not really feel like this is a distraction from other pressing parts of their lives. And I'll just close by saying I still think no matter what you do, that intimacy with a patient and family is the core of professional fulfillment. At least for me, it was.
This is so well said, because I feel like oncology gives us the privilege to have a very sacred bond with our patients, and I don't think any career is as rewarding as our career can be. So the next question is, what do we think is a reasonable expectation of an oncologist? And why should we have an all-rounded career, including research or administration or leadership, in addition to patient care?
So I think what we have to remember is that different people are different, and the balance for different people is going to vary a great deal. Some people quite legitimately want to do nothing more than take care of patients, and that is in and of itself an incredibly noble profession. I personally like a mix of taking care of patients, doing some amount of research, and for that matter, at this point in my career, being an administrator. But that's not right for everyone. And I think what we were focused on in writing the paper is defining different formulas for achieving that balance. Recognizing that for those people who want to do a mix of different activities, they can't be a full-time clinician and a full-time researcher at the same time. And medical centers and academic institutions need to recognize that.
That is so eloquently said. And this is kind of what brings me to my next point, which is yes, we want to have a certain percentage of clinical workload, depending on how much a physician is involved in research or admin or leadership. But also within the clinician role, there is this complexity of the patient care. Not every patient requires an hour. There are patients who require much shorter duration of follow-ups, etc. But again, there are also very complex, challenging situations where we have goals of care discussions, for example, where you cannot do that in a 15 or a 20-minute follow-up, yet we are all assessed on patient number or RVU loads or the duration of our appointments. Any insights into that?
Well, I think it's important to remember that if we're talking about RVUs are adjusted based on the time you spend with a patient. So it is actually possible to get credit within one's own system for spending more time with a patient. Yes, it's true that some visits are short and some visits are longer. And I think that that's something that we should make sure that when we submit bills and when RVUs are given, that incorporates the different nature of different visits. I actually think we have to be careful as a profession to both recognize that it's a special profession, but also not to think of ourselves as being so very different from all other physicians.
Right.
There are many fields where people have to spend more time. And I think that what will not serve us well is to say we're oncologists, we need to be treated totally differently. I think what does set us apart, though, is that clinical research in oncology is perhaps that much more important than in other areas. It's an expectation frequently on the part of our patients that their doctors be involved in clinical trials and clinical research. And we do have to remember that the time that it takes to pursue clinical research at times is not going to be fully reimbursed in any way other than to have the academic medical center recognize it.
Dr. Hudis, any insights there to add?
No, I mean, Eric said it just right. I think, earlier you asked me about fulfillment, but of course, the clinical care fulfillment is what empowers you, to be creative and energetic in the research, administrative, and teaching world as well. So it's all part of it. But what I'm hearing from Eric and from the paper and from the committee and the staff that worked on it is really what we're trying to do is establish a reasonable set of expectations here.
Right.
And the real bottom line is you can't have 150% of your time. It doesn't exist. There's only 100%. And so, as Eric points out, again, rightly, different clinicians, members of our community will have a different place where their balance should be. But if we want somebody to be a successful academician and have funded research projects, then we need to acknowledge that they need time that's dedicated to that, and we need to reward them financially for that so that they can spend the time. We can't expect them to be a superstar while also expecting them to see patients, for argument's sake, 5 days a week. The two things are incompatible. I'm thinking an extreme. So establishing this with some transparency, I think, is the real goal. And I want to emphasize what Eric said at the beginning again. The target for this really are leaders, those people that are setting expectations within healthcare systems.
Right.
And if I can just add, the one thing that doesn't work is to take someone starting in their career and say, you're going to start off seeing patients 4 days a week. And if you get a grant or if you find a research project, we'll let you back off. Because that person is never going to find that time to do it.
Right.
And particularly people early in their career, we have to protect them if they're going to be someone who they want to do some amount of research and we expect that they're going to do it. And finally, let me just say, there isn't a free ride. If in fact there's protected time to do some amount of research, people do have to produce.
Right.
That time isn't intended for long cycling trips or cooking classes. It's intended to actually do real work.
Right.
One thing I would just add that I think is a critical benefit of the paper is to make sure that early career faculty and their mentors, advisors, and institutions can all be aligned, that their expectations really are the same, that the early career person doesn't simply declare themselves in a certain role, but rather has the support to succeed in that role.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a very strong point, because as fellows, I think we all feel sheltered and governed. But as soon as we start our first job, we're on our own. So it's like that governing body takes off immediately.
And if I could just add one more thing, in some ways, Cliff and I had it easy when we started because life was different then. You could see patients 2 days a week and it would support a full-time salary. Now you see patients 2 days a week and it supports 2 days a week or 2.5 days a week. Cancer medicine was also far simpler then. There weren't, in the area of breast cancer where we both have lived our lives, there weren't that many treatments to think about.
Right.
It's very different now. It's more complicated. And I think that puts a whole different set of stressors on young people and people in the middle of their career compared to what we experienced.
Absolutely. I graduated in 2015, and since then I'm in breast cancer management. Even just like a HER2 breast cancer management has completely changed. So that's so true. My next question is about ASCO. So, volunteering for ASCO has been one of the most rewarding parts of my career's journey, and I've only volunteered for the last 6+ years. How do you guys do it at ASCO? Like, each time I come in, I go home wanting to do more for ASCO. Every ASCO staff is always cheerful. Like, we feel so valued that we want to do more work ourselves for ASCO. Like, how can we take away this to our organizations? Like, how can we feel pride in ourselves while working for our organizations like ASCO does?
So maybe I'll start. Since I made the conversion to full-time employee here, first of all, you have something very special that we aspire to at ASCO, a mission-driven organization. One of the things that I think many people in medicine in general take for granted and get used to is that when you go to work in the morning, you are there in an aligned way with all the rest of the staff trying to take care of patients. It doesn't matter if it's heart disease, if it's cancer, if it's pediatrics, it doesn't matter. And I think people sometimes take for granted and lose sight of the unbelievable power of that mission. So to be fair, we at ASCO look to you with a bit of envy because we want to have that same level of urgency, drive, and dedication to the mission. And we strive to duplicate it here. The flip side is, the reason you like coming here, I think, is the pressure is somewhat less. It's a chance to be creative. And to a degree, and I say this guardedly maybe, our resources match our aspirations and our intentions. We're not stressed exactly the same way. as unfortunately so many healthcare systems are. And that's not a criticism. That's just a reflection of the challenging reality of modern medicine in America. And I think that's what you're sensing sometimes.
And since I'm not an ASCO employee, just a frequent volunteer, or certainly frequent in recent years, I think I can do a little bit of ASCO bragging. So ASCO is about so much in oncology. It's about education. It's about enhancing clinical care. It's about research. It's about funding, particularly young individuals, through Conquer Cancer. And it has really evolved over the years. Now, that said, that evolution is to a large degree because of the dedicated volunteers. And without all of the dedicated volunteers, it wouldn't be what it is. And I think that you are so right. The people who work at ASCO are just amazing and try to make it even more enjoyable for all of us who are volunteers. So, it's very much a virtuous cycle.
Right. And on a personal note, I will share this, that I always wanted to shadow Dr. Hudis and ask him, how does he recruit ASCO staff? Because they're all phenomenal. I don't know how he does.
You and me both.
Perfect. Let's make a day out of it. Okay. So my next question is a little bit of a controversial question, but I'm going to say it anyway because I ponder over it so much. A new physician recruitment costs anywhere between $500,000 to $1 million. When a physician leaves a practice, it's not just the financial impact on the practice, but to me, what matters the most is that the sacred bond that we all share with our staff, with our patients, that's broken. And just like a patient feels disheartened when that bond is broken, we do too. So there are so many soft, unsaid losses that we cannot put on an Excel sheet or a P&L sheet that exist. Do you think that physician turnaround or physician satisfaction should be a part of quality metric or an accreditation or designation process for a cancer center?
That's an interesting question. It's never occurred to me that it should be a quality metric. However, I think it's a really good point, because if you're in an organization where the staff are turning over, both the physician staff and other staff are turning over on a frequent basis, that probably speaks to a real problem in the organization. So I think, not quite sure how to define it and how to include it in quality metrics, but it is really important. And I can tell you that in my 3 years as a cancer center director, I'm proud of the fact that we've hardly lost anyone who I wanted to keep. There are a few people who may have left, and I better be careful here because they could listen to this. There are a few people who have left where I think it was probably best for them to leave.
Right.
But in general, I think you want to create a work environment that is one that, unless there are compelling personal reasons, that people want to stay.
Absolutely.
And it's, as is frequently said, culture, eats strategy for breakfast. And, culture in an organization is really, really important. And I think it's the culture of an organization that keeps people there. And I might add that it's the culture at ASCO that keeps all of those people working at ASCO both there and keeps them interacting with all the volunteers in the very positive way that they do. I mean, they're just so competent and also so easy to work with.
Absolutely.
We spend a lot of time on culture. It's true. I want to caution everybody, though, or maybe offer an upgrade, because I've been thinking about your question. One thing, to keep in mind is that there are very different kinds of work environments with very, very highly variable local environments. There are lots of factors that can come into play in terms of overall staff stability and turnover. So I would be careful about cross-institutional comparisons in the context of a quality measure. I do think that above a certain threshold, you might look for improving rates of turnover as a metric. But I also would say, I can give you a concrete example. When I got here, we used to pay very close attention to staff turnover. We had very stable staff in the senior ranks and a lot of turnover at the junior ranks. And there were multiple factors that contributed to that. And driving that down became a target, which we did for a long time and tracked. And then it was low enough that we stopped paying attention to it. But I'll say, when it got low, it may not have been entirely just what we were doing. It may have been a change in the competitive environment and salaries and all kinds of other things. So I'm humbled a little bit in that regard. It's not all under our control.
Right. Right.
And when people leave organizations, sometimes they leave organizations for jobs that are really better jobs for them.
Right.
And we should celebrate that. Someone leaves and takes a promotion. We may not have that ability to give them a promotion on our own organization just because the positions may not be available.
Right.
So it is a mixed bag, but I think you're entirely right that when turnover rates are really high, particularly turnover rates among physicians, given the costs that are involved, it's a problem.
So changing organizations and ecosystems is going to take a while, right? But I'm glad that we're having a conversation around it at least, and very excited to learn that ASCO board is talking about this on a frequent basis too. But what would be one key change, like any leader listening to this podcast can take away from this? Both from you, Dr. Weiner and Dr. Hudis, like what could be one key change that a leader could implement tomorrow?
As a leader, you have to listen to the people who work for you. And you also have to be able to give them honest feedback. Mm-hmm. Much of the time when people come in and they're not happy, there are real challenges that you can try to fix. Every once in a while, that's not the case, and you have to be able to tell someone that honestly.
Right.
But I think that too often leaders try to fit someone into the job that they think they need done or they think the person wants without really listening to them and trying to understand what it is the person who they're talking to really needs. And I think that as a leader, what we should all be trying to do is trying to achieve that professional fulfillment, as we talked about earlier, for that individual, however that needs to be done. And, there are times when that can't be done in a given organization, but
Right.
if it can be, I think that's really our goal.
Perfect.
I would circle back to the paper and say, in terms of what can be done right now, it's exactly as Eric says, clarity around communications. And I would hope that people start to reference this paper and use it to set and then communicate clear expectations.
Sounds good.
Maybe I should say, negotiate them, because that's ideal. Have the discussion about what's because we want everyone to succeed.
So I'm going to get into a little bit of a fun aspect of the podcast. Maybe we'll start with Dr. Weiner. Your favorite book?
Anna Karenina.
And why is that?
Well, as some people know, I was a Russian studies major in college, and I've always liked Russian literature.
Okay. Favorite leader?
I'm passing on that one.
What about any favorite study, non-breast cancer study?
So I have to say, as one who has been trying to minimize toxicity in our cancer treatment for years, that the phase 2 trial of a checkpoint inhibitor in patients with MS high rectal cancer from Memorial Sloan Kettering is a very elegant, very small study that I think ultimately has changed clinical practice.
And favorite restaurant in New Haven?
That's easy. It's the Fairhaven Oyster Company.
Okay. All right, Dr. Hudis, on to you. Your favorite book. I know you are a voracious reader.
Sometimes I'm driven to read because I belong to a book club that assigns us books once a quarter. And by hell or high water, I get through the book. So it's opened my eyes. I keep returning to David McCullough's Truman. And the reason for that is, first of all, it's unbelievably sobering and humbling to recognize that a half century or more ago, a president of the United States was facing many of the same divisive politics that we think are so unique to our time today.
Your favorite leader?
I have many great leaders. I have a list of favorites. When I first met Eric, I was afraid to talk to him, but I came to appreciate his leadership. But along with that, I've been really fortunate to work with some great leaders. Larry Norton taught me, really exposed me to the wonder of clinical trials and research on breast cancer. And Alan Lichter, my predecessor in this job, was a remarkably forward-looking CEO who set ASCO up in a way that enabled me to come in here and take next steps with it. I think about them all the time. I talk to them as often as I can.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Can I go back and answer the leader question?
Yes, sir.
So my favorite leader is actually my present boss, who is the dean of Yale Medical School, Nancy Brown, who, as I often say about her, I could use an extra pat on the back once in a while from her, but I always know she has my back.
Aw, that's so sweet. Dr. Hudis, back to you. Your favorite study, non-breast cancer study.
So my favorite study is a very different one. By the way, the study Eric cited is a fantastic but because I'm a geek in certain ways, and because I love evidence and I don't like preconceived notions, my favorite study is this randomized observational trial done with parents and children, in which they fed the kids sweetened or artificially sweetened, I think, drinks, and they had the parents assess their activity because of the story that sugar caused hyperactivity. And of course, there was absolutely no association between feeding them sugar and their behavior. Love is double blind, and controlled. And it was just one of those debunking studies that I just adore.
Thank you for sharing that. As a mom of a 15-year-old, I think I needed to hear something like that. All right. And your favorite restaurant in New York?
Well, it's tough to say because obviously there are so many.
Right.
That's ready to get political, but I will tell you where I take people for lunch and have, business lunches whenever I can, is a place called Fleming, which is on 62nd Street, right off of Madison Avenue. It's a perfect Italian cafe with high quality food, a very, very stylish and quiet place to have a business lunch with people. And they have some outdoor tables as well. But the most important thing is the food is just perfect. And it's walking distance from my home.
Wonderful. That's very helpful. If it's
you can go there anytime, and I think they're on Resi or Open Table. So
wonderful. And now a fun fact question about each one of you. Dr. Hudis, first for you. You did some research on earthworm muscle biology as a middle schooler in your 8th grade.
More or less, yeah.
Yeah. What led you to do that, and what did you learn from that?
My mother is the short answer to what led me to do that, because she was certain that I wanted to be a doctor and saw this as an important step along the way.
That's awesome.
Right. And, what I learned from it was actually very early on how difficult it is and ultimately rewarding to do laboratory research, because what we did was ground up these earthworms and then did blots on the myosin in order to, I think, assess its weight. And earthworm apparently is all muscle, if you remember your biology. So it was the right model for that. It was a really amazing experience because it got me inside a Hahnemann Medical College, a Hahnemann University Medical College back in those early days, and it exposed me to the inside of the hospital as a young student. So I thought it was just fantastic.
That's exciting. Dr. Weiner, you went to college and did Russian history. Any key takeaways, or how did it impact your personal or professional life?
Oh, gosh. You could argue that it did less than one might have imagined, given the fact that I started in graduate school in Russian studies, dropped out and took pre-med courses. But I still love Russian language. And although my ability to speak is far diminished these days, I'm trying to get it back with Duolingo.
Right.
And I've been spending a few minutes each evening doing a little Duolingo lesson. And in truth, of the various foreign languages that I've tried to learn, my Russian accent is better than any of the others, since I can't even attempt a French accent.
That's really fun to learn. My last question for each one of you. If you were to relive your life, would you become an oncologist?
Absolutely. Without a moment's doubt. It has been the most rewarding career that I could imagine. It has been a truly tremendous career. I enjoy seeing patients more than I can tell you. I still do it. I can't imagine not doing it. And I've found it to be just an incredible career.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Dr. Hudis?
Yeah, but I mean, my answer is similar. Of course I would. And I didn't know that I wanted to be an oncologist when I went to medical school. I thought I wanted to be a psychiatrist. It was my exposure.
Me too.
Yeah, it was my exposure to the oncology clinic in my third year of internal medicine residency that really opened my eyes. The other thing I'll say, if Eric and I are about the same vintage, but in the late 70s into the early 80s, we were dreaming of targeted therapies. We were dreaming of antibodies that would actually deliver payloads to cancer. We were talking about it then. But we could imagine it, but it wasn't here yet. But I think we both and many others believed that this era was coming. And we've lived through a remarkable transformation in oncology, certainly in breast cancer where we both worked, but I think even more so in some other areas. And yet, I think it's still early days. So if I were starting today, I would definitely go into oncology.
That's great to hear. All right. Well, thank you so much to both of you for sharing your insights. I'm going to wrap it up with some key takeaways for the oncology community to ponder and definitely our leaders to ponder. We need to be listening to our employees and physicians, and not just physicians, but the entire workforce, because it's not one size fits all. We need to get more open-minded and discuss physicians' contributions that result in an all-rounded quality and dignified patient care, and not just production based on patient numbers and RVUs. And can we create models where physicians rate their organizations based on their satisfaction or professional advancement, or create a quality metric based on physician turnaround or satisfaction that could contribute to accreditation or designation processes? My last thought to ponder, maybe ASCO and NCI could create another M-code model, which probably stands for My Career in Oncology, Development and Enhancement. Thank you again to our viewers and listeners. This is Jasmin Kamboj, along with Dr. Clifford Hudis and Dr. Eric Weiner, signing off on behalf of OncoDaily from our conversation on Empowering Oncologists. Thank you.
Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to OncoDaily on YouTube. Hit the bell icon to stay updated.